Buenas noches. This is the second installment of a series of videos entitled The Woman with 1.5 Hands. Part 2, which you're listening to right now, is something I like to call definitions. Usually when, say, deliberating on the purchase of a publication, I think it's fine, probably even preferable, to skip around, to sample from the middle here and there, etc., before the decision to purchase or not to purchase is made. But not here. Not with this series. It just won't work. What I'm trying to say is if you haven't already viewed the introductory video of this series, you really ought to go view it first before you continue here with this, the second in the series. And now, without further ado, definitions. Over the years, I've conducted dozens of focus groups on this topic, and almost all of them have been with people I've had more than a simple waving acquaintance with at a job or socially. Most of the time, these focus groups have included only two people, myself and another, or sometimes three, and a scant few with more than that. Why such small groups, one might ask? It's a contentious subject, to say the least. After rolling out an introduction, say the equivalent or thereabouts of my first video in this series, the most frequent attitude or stance from women has been one of defense. Like I reached out toward a junkyard dog, "Here, puppy, puppy," while he gnawed on a ham bone. Many kept snarling, so to speak, no matter how vividly, how accurately, how salivatingly or saliva-dripping-inducingly I described the filet mignon I was replacing that meatless bone with. Why, seemed to be their question. Why are you trying to take away my keys? Why are you trying to take away what very often is my only defense? When the three of us were in our late 20s, the wife of my best friend at that time, when she wasn't working on her doctorate in environmental sciences, lined out the following analogy. Women walk into shadowy rooms daily, she told me, and in these eerie rooms they're surrounded by 100 bobo dolls, 98 of which just smile and end up not raping them. Women, she continued, don't know which bobo doll is which, so we have to come up with some form of defense against all, and not hurting the feelings of this or that bobo doll is not the number one goal of our overall battle plan against those two rapists. Or something to that effect. It's been a few years, so yes, I'm paraphrasing, but that was her gist. I'll return to her analogy in my footnotes. With some tweaking, it can actually be improved upon. But first, I must mention a bumper sticker that trumpets a similar message. Men rape, men can stop rape, or men rape, men can stop raping, quote unquote, is how I took it. To be precise, it declared in a large font, men, ... rape, and in the middle of those two words, in smaller letters, it said, can stop. So if a man can read English, that makes him a rapist? Oedipus, after blinding himself, probably wouldn't have been irked or vexed too much by that bumper sticker had it been affixed to a passing-by chariot because he couldn't see it. But the rest of us who are male, can see, understand English, and haven't raped, well, I mean, if you're a self-respecting person, why wouldn't you at least question that logic for a second or two? How can one stop raping if one never started raping? It's as if that bumper sticker is asking for the men who read it to do a 180 as far as rape goes. The problem with that logic is that certain men, and I'm one of them, need to do the opposite of a 180 with regards to rape. In other words, we need to keep on doing exactly what we have been doing, not raping. I first saw that bumper sticker in the 80s in a very colorful place known as Eugene, Oregon. From the get-go, I knew something was wrong with that whole approach. In my first offering, i.e. the introductory video to this series, I stated something that I think is indisputably true, namely, that rape is first and foremost a crime of violence. This statement was not bracketed, then or now, by quote marks. Can't say the same for men rape, men can stop rape, quote unquote. It has to be put in quotes, because I know I've never raped, and I can read, But I can't pass those words along to others in a work of non-fiction, because that would be a fiction. Some men have raped. I have never raped. I have, on the other hand, been falsely accused of being a potential rapist. Here, an imaginary critic might say, well, okay, whatever. We're here to solve problems, not pick nits. Every man is a potential rapist, and you're overreacting. A woman who, by shaking her keys at you, is signaling to you that she thinks you're a potential rapist, and she's not calling you a rapist. She's just saying you have the potential to rape. Quote, and you're a potential N-word, end of quote, the author of this video is currently saying in this sentence to a black friend of his, a friend who will certainly understand what I'm driving at. We've discussed this topic many times. A friend who will understand that I'm not bringing up the word that rhymes with trigger to be mean or racist, but simply to make a point, which is, if you're not black, how far do you think you're going to travel while attempting to stroll alone through Harlem or Compton or Watts or East St. Louis, and while raving around a symbol that says, I think you're a potential N-word. If you try to do the N-word thing to me, I will shove these keys into your eyes. And that's a question. How far do you think you're going to get? My best guess? A couple of blocks. You'll get that far, and then one or more self-respecting blacks will do to you what the Bills did to the Chiefs. Yes, here in America, a woman shaking her keys at a man she considers to be an undesirable or somehow beneath her is comparable to a non-black calling a black the N-word. They both seem somewhat similar, but I could be wrong. Time for some more field research. What I need are some volunteers to go for some strolls in the cities mentioned above and elsewhere. You can't appear to be black, and with the exception of you actually saying the word that rhymes with trigger, I can't say it because it will be taken out of context and used against me. Say the following. I don't necessarily think you're a N-word, but I think you're a potential N-word. With that in mind, I am hereby warning you that if you try to do the N-word thing to me, I will defend myself against you. Note, to keep your petri dish sterile, so to speak, it will help greatly to stick to those exact words, and to do so within earshot of blacks. Also, it would help if these black people appear to be minding their own business before you happen along. Don't shout it or whisper it. Say it plainly and simply, and as if it were a fact. Don't look directly into anyone's face, but in the same way that most hearing people can hear rattled keys from quite a distance, be reasonably certain that if they have average or better hearing, they should be able to hear and get what you are saying. And then after you get out of the hospital, email me your findings or leave a comment down below. Point being, when a woman consciously makes an effort to shake her keys at a particular man, she doesn't potentially have certain feelings regarding him. She has those feelings. You're not really calling that old black woman a potential N-word. You're calling her the N-word. You're not really calling that guy a potential anything with a shake of your keys. You're calling him a rapist. During the moment when a woman attempts to shake her keys at a man, if at that moment these two, key shaker and key shakee, just happen to be surrounded by crowds of eyewitnesses, security cameras, security personnel, and all the other elements or conditions pertaining to the Wal-Mart petri dish that I discussed in my first video, why, if the chances of being raped in a crowded supercenter are so small as to be essentially non-existent, why do keys get rattled? And now take your answer, whatever it is, and apply it to the Arrowhead Stadium petri dish. Why, in a huge city, a city beset, a city besieged by a crime rate much worse than Bentonville, why do keys not only not get shaken in Kansas City, but they're nowhere to be seen or heard? The short answer is that there's a difference between a real potential rapist, and that's without quotes, and a potential rapist with quotes. In an earlier draft, the word rational made an appearance right about now, only to be immediately shouted down by women of all makes and models. And here comes a quote. Rape, these women virulently contended, is not rational. Rapists are not rational. Who were you to say that a rational person would say that a rape can't possibly occur in a crowded Wal-Mart? End of quote. Well, I'm not saying that. Rape can happen anywhere and any time. I'm merely saying that if we go by the evidence of them consciously shaking their keys in some situations and at some individuals, but not even carrying their keys in other situations, there must be a difference in the minds of the key shakers between men they've never met before at a Wal-Mart and men they've never met before at an NFL game. In other words, what started out as a good thing has undergone some changes and is now pretty much something else. Women used to shake their keys at those they deemed potential rapists. But now, at whom do they shake them? And have instances of rape in America increased or decreased since the phenomenon of key shaking has become more and more common? Answers to these questions soon to follow. But first, a few minutes ago indicated that any self-respecting man who's never raped would at least question the logic of a bumper sticker printed with the words, "Men can stop rape." Then I asked how one could stop raping if one never started raping in the first place. Insensitivity or myopia? Well, excuse me. Insensitivity? Hey, messed up on that word at least 8 times now. No, this is the first take. But I kind of knew I was going to. Anyway. Then I asked how one could stop raping if one never started raping in the first place. Insensitivity or myopia on my part? Whatever the case may be, I thought about it some more and then widened my scope and envisioned others interacting with still others. Perhaps, I thought, the person who put that sticker on his or her car wants, at least in part, to spur those men who see it to attempt to stop other men from raping. Like it's a plea for help and not necessarily an accusation aimed at any one individual man. "Here," the sticker says, tossing the problem at all men. "It's in your lap. Deal with it." Fair enough. I see that glove thrown down upon the ground. Here goes. There are 3 ways to proceed, one of which is everything else. So perhaps I have all the bases covered. The second involves using the 5 senses, and the third gallops or meanders down a religious or spiritual path. I am not one to deny the usefulness of a few kind and far-reaching words at, say, a funeral, words that reach high up into the heavens and truly help with the grieving process. Even so, I would hope that the detectives searching for the killer or killers of my loved one lying there in that casket would do more than pay their respects. Would pay their respects, yes, fine, would cross themselves if they're Catholic, and more. But then after the funeral is over, I wish and hope that these detectives would use their 5 senses while they investigate, rather than employing only religious or spiritual methods. If, against my wishes, these police detectives only prayed and or performed other religious rites, like throw virgins into volcanoes, a common religious practice not so long ago, and they still ended up catching and helping to convict my loved one's killer or killers, I suppose that would be okay. But unrealistic. And really, to a parent of a pubescent or prepubescent daughter, say, a parent who's looking for realistic and practical answers to the question, how can I better inform my daughter about rape so that her chances of being victimized are lowered? To a parent seriously asking a criminal justice professional that question, how is it anything other than a slap in the face if that professional were to limit his or her suggestions to prayer or meditation, or encouraging that daughter to wear a cross or some other amulet said to have the ability to ward off evil? Religious sentiments might help in life, and yes, sometimes I do stare at this computer screen while I'm allegedly composing or making videos, a stare that for all intents and purposes might as well be meditating. But overall, rather than tell you to pray about solutions to rape, my goal is to travel toward that same destination, but I'll employ my 5 senses en route instead. Again, I'm not rejecting someone of the cloth comforting a victim of rape. I'm not saying that that comfort won't do any good, and in fact, I am saying that that comfort will act like a soothing pain reliever applied to a wound, and that it will help heal and it will help lessen the pain. But rather than palliatives administered after the fact, wouldn't it be nice to use science, to use the 5 senses, to prevent that wound from happening in the first place? That said, I'd like to carry on. Please excuse if I limit the remainder of this investigation to relying on my five senses, rather than drifting off into the spirit world. Though the Holy Ghost is said to be with us always, I think the ghost of the inventor of the TV is just about with us when we sit down in our living rooms, aim our remotes at his invention, and click on. It's then that we see things and hear things. Degrees of accuracy, of realness, of truth are often, if not always, in question when we watch and or listen to our big screened friend. Sure, often there's confirmation. We'll see something on TV, and an online news agency will corroborate. Or sometimes a friend will be there when something monumental happens, an event that we might otherwise only be able to read about in a newspaper or hear about on the radio. Getting an inside scoop like that, hearing about what happened from a friend who was actually there at the time, is an invaluable resource, a coup, if you will, in the information race. But then again, you weren't there. Your friend was, or a television camera person was, or someone with a microphone was. Something amazing happened on September 11th, and I was there. Surrounded by thousands of men, I noticed that none of these men were being reminded, with shaken keys, that they were potential rapists. 10 years earlier, exactly 10 years, a couple of towers toppled, but I wasn't there. Even so, I'm pretty sure those towers came down. And so are you. I'm trying to work this around to something like keeping it real. There are ways of organizing or packaging thought that are slanted towards selling things or ideas to readers or viewers or listeners. There are ways of relating ideas verbally or on paper or with computer bytes that seem to be exploratory. And there are ways of packaging thought that I think of as part of deconstructionism, where syntax sometimes drives the thoughts, and sometimes the thoughts drive the syntax. And they say, there is always some back and forth. Quote, it depends upon what the meaning of the word is, end quote, said the former president, Bill Clinton, whom I never met in person. But for some reason I know a lot about him. Don't you? And for some reason we know a lot about his love life. How intimate and yet how alien. To know so much about a person and yet to have never seen or heard him in person. But I believe he exists, that's for sure. I also believe the Holocaust happened, that's also for sure. But I've never been to Germany. We've seen a lot of things on TV. We've seen spaceships fly to distant galaxies with people aboard them. We've seen people interact with dinosaurs, walk on the moon, go back and forth in time, and more. I remember once seeing a submarine-style vessel, along with the people inside it, get shrunk down with a special machine. Shrunk so small, in fact, that it was able to be injected into an unhealthy person. And then these tiny people used lasers to eradicate some tumors in that person. During that surgery, the patient's antibodies attacked one of the actresses, Raquel Welch. And it became very dramatic when her crewmates tried to peel them off of her in time and without ripping her outfit. Yes, we've seen a lot on TV, and we've read about many famous people. But I've never smelled the President of the United States. Not this one, not any of them. But I have no doubt that each and every one of them has been real, and the current one is real. No doubt at all. If there's any kind of a struggle at this juncture, I met a lot of people who would first hawk a loogie into a nearby spittoon, and then matter-of-factly state that common sense should be the savior. I can't agree. One man's common sense is another man's junk. For instance, not too long ago, most doctors didn't spend very much time worrying about sanitary conditions in their hospitals. If they had recently brushed their horse or performed an autopsy, it was not a necessity for them to wash their hands before jumping right on over to another patient, this time a live one hoping to get better. Then, in the 1840s, a Hungarian obstetrician named, hope I'm getting this right, Ignaz Semmelweis, noticed that the mortality rates at two different maternity clinics were markedly different. The one set up to train midwives had a much lower infant mortality rate than did its sister clinic, which had been set up to train doctors. much in the same way that I have set aside alcohol consumption as possibly being a contributing cause as to why no keys were out or shaken at a recent football game. Semmelweis also, quote, excluded overcrowding as a cause, since the midwife's clinic was always more crowded and yet the mortality was lower, end of quote. Bit of a sidebar here. I simply can't speed through this one. Semmelweis was saying that the infant mortality rate at the midwife's clinic should have been higher than the rate at the doctor's clinic due to overcrowding. And because we humans spread diseases to each other, and the more of us that there are in a limited confined space, usually the more chances for diseases to spread, which usually translates into more diseases being spread. Somehow, this was not only counterbalanced, but even more so. It was completely outweighed or overshadowed by one or more other factors. Similarly, as outlined in my first video, with alcohol and violence often, but not always, associated with each other, and with rape being a crime of violence, it stands to reason that women who don't want something to happen to them, and that's part of the definition of rape, you don't want it to happen to you, if these women find themselves surrounded by men who, because many of them have been drinking, are statistically more likely to engage in violence, then at least one of these women would have been carrying a rape defense keys at that NFL game, instead of 0. This comparison grows in importance when you consider that many women fervently shake their keys in Wal-Marts, where it's rare to find even the occasional drunk person, let alone throngs of loud, boisterous drunks. Drunks who grow braver when there are more of them, especially in a place, a football game, where it's okay to be extremely drunk and animated and sloppy. So much for that sidebar. I get into that much more detail in the next video. Now let's fast forward to Louis Pasteur and the hand-washing ideas that landed Dr. Semmelweis in an insane asylum have been elevated to the level of progressive and widely accepted scientific breakthrough. Fast forward some more, and Sigmund Freud enlightens us with the notion that washing one's hands too often is a sign of another illness, a mental illness, if you will, otherwise known as neurotic or obsessive-compulsive behavior. Fast forward still again, and vegans are now telling us omnivores and carnivores that there's more E. coli in our kitchen sinks than in our toilets, even immediately after cleaning both and with different brushes, and with our usual cleaning solutions, and after employing approximately the same amount of this stuff, elbow grease, to each. Now, I'm all for scrubbing up after a visit to the restroom, but boy howdy, does there ever seem to be a lot of twists and turns in the history of hand washing. And what was common sense 180 years ago is junk today, but might also, one day, see another period of ascendancy. So ideas change, and sometimes the stuff we see on TV is real and true for a while. The latest on brontosauruses, for instance, is that they never existed, or rather that paleontologists think that we should think of them as apatosauruses instead. But I never saw either in person. And only the most avant-garde feminists, i.e. the ones who theorize that all sex is rape, would have trouble with the following. I've never seen anyone raped in person. I've never heard anyone raped in person. I've never smelled the scent of sexual interactions between two or more people emanating from where a rape either occurred or was said to have occurred. I have never tasted evidence of rape, and I have never felt myself nor another being raped. On the other hand, I've seen and heard a lot of rapes on TV and at the movie show. And I've read in the newspaper and gathered via many other mass media outlets that people really do get raped. Also, and this is very important, I've been forced to eat my veggies. And just about daily I feel forced or coerced into going to work. Maybe, even if you've never seen or heard a rape in person, you've seen other coercive forces in action, in person, without the filter of TV and or anything else that might color or cloud your observation. So you may have, and I definitely have, personal proof that people can be forced against their will. And I know that millions of women throughout history have been raped. But I've never seen or heard a rape happen even once in person. We get asked, often, for our attention, for our focus. Sometimes a person can be ahead of the crowd, like Dr. Semmelweis obviously was, and try to push his ideas onto others, and then push some more, and sometimes The crowd deems this pushy person insane, and so the crowd wins, nut gets locked up. Or does the crowd win? The Holocaust actually happened, but with respect to the pain that Holocaust sufferers felt, I have only one experience with that pain, or rather it's with post-Holocaust conversation-oriented pain, and it was very minor and didn't leave a scar. It didn't even leave an emotional scar, because I didn't take what was said as a personal insult. He, my college friend, said that though I wasn't alive during the 30s or 40s, that had I been alive, I would have been the kind of person, and here he jabbed me in the chest with his fingernail, to do to him what the Germans did to the Jews, which is to say, what the Germans did to his people, him being the kind of person who celebrated Hanukkah, and me being what he called a goy, or part of the goyim, with ancestors from Western Europe. So I was made to feel pain, fingernail pain, and this is retribution for something I had no part of, over something that really happened, but it happened before either of us was born. Point being, I'm all for comforting victims of rape, and I'm all for allotting toward rape shelters an even bigger portion of my taxes. But my only irrefutable in-person witnessing of sex is associated with sensual joy and tenderness, gentle massaging, giggly pillow talk, two people making each other feel good. Sex is a good thing, from what I've witnessed in person. Sex, in my own personal experience, has only been a good thing, has only involved feeling great, sharing great feelings. Wait, what? You say there's an activity that is somewhat similar to that, but it involves coercion and hate, tears and violence? It's just hard to understand. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that. I know it happens, this completely negative version of sex. I know it happens, but I just can't understand why it would ever happen. So there are two ways in which I'm alien to this topic, but I'm trying to understand and I'm trying to help eliminate the problem. One, I'm alien to the notion that force or coercion would ever be part of sex. And two, I've never seen or heard this type of sex happen in person. So, to a certain extent, I have to take it on faith that this form of sex actually happens. Defining something out of existence is not what this is about. It's about traveling down a real path rather than an imaginary one. Key shakers have been told that if they follow the yellow brick road, it will lead them to Oz, which is the land of never being raped. One of the yellow bricks in that road is to shake their keys at particular male strangers, but they just end up not shaking their keys at other male strangers. I think there is a way to get to that place, the place where fewer rapes occur, but the first thing to do is wake up. Wake up and smell the statistical evidence that almost all rapes are committed by men who just happen to not get keys shaken at them very often, if at all. Which begs the question, why does being in the presence of certain individuals lead to a shaking of a wrist, a saber rattling, if you will, but being in the presence of other individuals fails to generate a similar response? As promised, it's now time to examine some of the dissimilarities between what happened during a typical visit to a typical supermarket and what happened on 9/11/11. Up next, something I like to call dissimilarities.